This is Sean with TWA Stories, and I'm speaking with a gentleman that has been with TWA. What was the original year? What was it?
1963.
1963. And your name is Luvern Doctor, but you aren't a doctor, ironically, but that is your last name. Is that right?
That's right. I doctor airplanes.
You doctor the airplanes. That's what I loved about your email was Jet Doctor 747. All right, so we're gonna dive into a few things, but if you could just tell the viewers and look right in the camera when you do it. Tell the viewers just kind of where you're from, about your parents, where you grew up, maybe where you went to high school, just a little bit of background.
Okay, well, I was born in South Dakota, but I lived most of my school years in Nebraska, and I went to a school called Weeping Water Public Schools. Of course, my mother and father, Kenneth and Judith Doctor. I had two brothers, James and Eldon, and a sister. Her name was Carrie, or is Carrie. I'm sorry.
All right, and your parents, what were their roles in society? What did they do?
Well, my father was kind of a jack of all trades, but he had a repair shop in Weeping Water, and then he started a trucking company, and he had the trucking company for, I don't know, probably 30 years. Started out real small, grew and grew and grew, and it didn't get real big, but he was successful at it. My mother used to work part-time, try to help us, and then when my dad's business got going, she was the bookkeeper and wrote the checks.
All right. So I'd like to commend you and your wife. You're about to hit your 61st year of marriage. Is that right?
That's correct, in June.
And it's Evelyn. So your one daughter is Amy, and one that passed away when she was 2 is Elizabeth. Is that also correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And have you guys been, I know you were out in LAX for a long time with your career, and a little bit of background. United States Air Force, you started in 1958 to 62.
Yep.
You're in aircraft maintenance.
Yep.
And then in May of 63 is when you started with TWA. So what was that transition from the Air Force to TWA?
Well, I kind of stumbled into that. A fellow that I was working with at the time after I got out of the Air Force told me one day, he said, I'm going to Kansas City, their interview with TWA, they're hiring mechanics. He said, you want to go along? I said, sure, I'll go with you. So I go down there, made an application at the old downtown airport where TWA's base was at the time. And we both went in there, filled out an application. They interviewed us, and 2 or 3 different people interviewed us. And so when I got done with my last interview, I went out and talked to the fellow who was kind of in charge of the process. And he said, we're going to send you out to MCI for another interview. He says, but we're not sending your friend. I said, well, that's going to be kind of difficult because he drove.
Okay.
So it turned out I went out for an interview and they hired me, but they didn't hire my friend.
All right. So we're going to kind of rattle through some of your jobs. For one, you were an airframe repairman, and that was for the Air Force.
Right.
Then it's TWA. You started out as a sheet metal mechanic.
True.
And then an AP mechanic. So explain what an AP mechanic is.
Well, A&P mechanic means airframe and power plant mechanic, and it's a license issued by the FAA. So it authorizes people to perform maintenance on aircraft and return them to service under certain conditions.
We might be bouncing around a little bit, but who are these gentlemen in the photograph right here?
Well, that's my team at the maintenance coordinator's office in MCI. That's Ron Ford on the left, Bill McDonald with the flashy tie, Sam Broomfield with the, I believe that's his retirement plaque there in his arms. And then, of course, that's me with my ID badge showing.
All right, so I'd like to kind of bring it back a little bit, and I'm not sure if this was before you started with TWA. Was this before TWA? You got it a GTO in '66, and you won this in Long Beach at the Lions Drag Race. Is that right?
That's right. No, that was after we moved to Los Angeles in 1966. And that picture would have been taken about 1967.
Okay, so when you moved out to LA, your original, I guess, job was supervisor aircraft maintenance. Is that your original position?
Well, when we first moved to Los Angeles, I was a sheet metal mechanic.
Okay.
And then once I got my A&P certificate, I worked as an aircraft mechanic. And then in 1970, my boss, Mr. Kennedy, saw fit to promote me to supervisor.
All right. So this is the shot of your grandfather, your father, yourself, and then each individual photo. One is with one daughter and one is with the other daughter. These obviously were your mentors growing up, and I know that you made some notes on your dad always taught you how to work the machines. If you'd just like to speak to them a little bit and what they instilled in you.
Well, both my grandfather and my father taught me how to repair things, how to fix things when they were broke, and basically how to live your life and do well.
All right, and this is from two of your different business cards,
Right.
and then you received this from a couple levels above you. As far as the note, if you could give a little bit of the backstory to that.
I guess one day I was kind of had my head down, wondering why I had so many troubles or problems at work, and so Mr. Kennedy wrote this note for me to help me understand why I was in the position I was in.
And basically, what's the note say?
Well, I wish I could read it here, but it says, "Be thankful for the problems. If they were less difficult, someone else would have your job."
So bottom line, you got a job and you're handling the tough issues, and that's why you got the position, because you can handle it.
Right.
That's great. So you've listed out a few different mentors and people you worked with, besides your father and grandfather, John and Kenny, and you got Charlie Thompson, which is your first supervisor at TWA. Yeah. And then, you've listed a few of these. You got Charlie, and then you got Ole Barnett, and manager at MCI shops, and then Jim Kennedy.
Yeah.
Why don't you just kind of mention a few of them and what you really feel you learned from them from Kansas City and out in LA?
Well, I tried to pay attention to the managers and supervisors that I thought were doing a good job and watch them and learn from them. So those fellas that you just mentioned were some of them. There was a gentleman by the name of Dick Antea. Jack McLean was another person that I worked closely with. I learned a lot from Jack. Chris Metro, as we called him, the crazy Greek. He was from Boston. I learned a lot of things from him, and I learned a few things from him not to do. Chris Doan, who I worked for in Kansas City, great guy, taught me a lot of stuff. Some things he probably doesn't even realize he taught me. John Cooper, who was the vice president of maintenance in those days, I learned a lot by just watching him and listening to him. There was a fellow by the name of Dave Cruz, who was a senior vice president of maintenance in the 80s, their early 80s. The best thing I learned from him, I was in a meeting in Kansas City one day, and he was talking to the whole group, and he said, he started talking about Mr. Icon and what Dave thought was going to happen to the airline. And he said, here's what I think he's going to do. And he outlined some of the steps. And he said, I would urge you all, if you know of any other job openings at any airline, I would urge you to take them. And 6 months later, he was a vice president of maintenance at American Airlines. So I figured he believed what he was doing. So I took his advice. And when the early buyout came in the end of 1985, I took the early buyout and I left TWA at that point. And it was probably the best career move I ever made.
Well, we're going to talk about something that happened while you were still there. I believe was this was that you helped customize the Pope's airplane. Is that right? Can you kind of tell like how you got selected for that and just some of the backstory and then maybe some of the other celebrities or people you've been able to meet over the years?
Well, I was just one of many folks that worked on that aircraft at Kansas City, but we basically rebuilt the whole interior of the airplane. We put in a lot of special seats and special carpeting and lots of things for the Pope to travel there in 1965. So anyway, they gave all the folks that worked on the Pope's airplane, they gave them this service award, and that was nice to have.
And so were there any particulars that were a little outside of the ordinary that they requested to have on the plane that you had to construct or anything for any particular reason that stands out?
Well, I don't know that they made any. They probably made lots of requests, but we didn't get to see them. We just put in what they told us to put in. We modified a lot of the seats that were on there. They were specially constructed just for that flight. A lot of the aircraft chairs, you know.
Okay. And so were there any other people over the years that you were able to meet that were celebrities or political individuals and kind of being high ups?
Well, we got to see some people. And when I was in Los Angeles, there were many movies that were filmed on our ramp and in the hangar. We got to meet, lots of movie stars, and I can't name them all, but the one name that popped in my brain just now was Lorne Green. I wish I could remember some of the rest of them. Probably the most famous person I ever met was President Reagan. When he used to come to California, they parked Air Force One on our ramp, and of course they limited the number of people that got to go out and meet him when he got off the airplane. And I was lucky enough to go out and meet him one day, and he came down the stairs and he just talked to everybody like a normal, just an everyday guy. How you doing? What's going on? Nice to see you. So that was kind of neat.
That's pretty great. So you working out at LAX, you obviously have a lot of international flights that would come in there. If you could recall some situations that maybe went awry from international flights that were trying to come in, or just some really good stories that you remember happening out there that stand out, if there's anything that particularly, maybe a plane had to go down early, or there was some maintenance issues, or something over the water. I don't know. Just any ideas?
Well, the thing that comes to mind for me was the first nonstop flight from Los Angeles to London. And it was with one of our early 747s. And so that airplane was fully loaded with fuel, and I don't remember how many people were on it, but I remember watching it go down the runway. And when it left the runway at the very west end of the airport, it went down below the sand dunes towards the ocean, and you couldn't see the airplane. And then within a couple of seconds, it came up again. So for the people on the airplane, that was probably pretty exciting. It was exciting for us that were just watching it. I know that. Other than that, there were lots of things that happened in Los Angeles while I was there. I mean, we had one of our 707s land there, and something went awry on the landing, and they had to evacuate the airplane on the runway, and everybody got off, but the airplane burned up.
Wow.
Yeah, you can say that. I mean, it was ugly. We saw firsthand what happens when an aircraft burns. It'll burn the roof right out of it. So I don't remember exactly what the cause was, but another thing that happened, it didn't involve TWA, but there was a commuter airplane taxiing out to the runway and just got on the runway, and another airplane landed right on top of it. And they wound up just off of TWA's ramp at the hangar at the time. Now that happened, I was either off or I was on vacation or something, but the fellas told me about it, of course, when I got back to work. And there's lots of little things that happen all the time, in the aircraft industry. Operationally, things go haywire. The airport would fog in, and people would have to go to an alternate airport, and then sometimes we'd bus them from the alternate airport up to Los Angeles, and then of course their luggage got there after they did, and so the people that handled all that were, doing a bang up job of trying to get all their belongings to them at the right place and keep them happy.
All right, and you also made a note that, was this that you were the first ETOPS operator in the United States? If you could explain that.
TWA was the first U.S. ETOPS operator, and we did it with our, at that time, brand new 767s. So ETOPS was an authorization to fly further away from an alternate airport than you normally could. And so that enabled us to fly the twin engine airplane across the ocean to Europe. So we started out going to London, and then eventually it expanded to other airports there. A good friend of mine that I worked with by the name of Ed Royal, he flew with the airplane on the first flight. He was a power plant person, and he just went along to make sure that everything was well taken care of on the other end. So that was kind of exciting for us in Los Angeles, because we prepared the aircraft for that flight, and it left LA and went to St. Louis, and then it launched the overseas flight from St. Louis.
Wow. All right, and I want to show kind of an older pic. I'm assuming this was when you were with TWA, not when you were in the Air Force. You're working on what type of engine here?
Well, that's a 707. For that was a JT3D, and I think I'm doing something with a turbo compressor there. That would have been like 1968 or 9, something in that area.
Okay, and then here's a shot of you doing your morning meetings at the podium, and this was in LA or this was in Missouri?
That was in Los Angeles, and that was where we did our roll call room and talked about, what we were going to do that particular shift and things of that nature. So I was the supervisor at that point. That would have been in early 70s sometime.
And here's a shot. It looks like it's in the 70s, if not early 80s, of you at your desk. And this is also out in LA.
That's in the early 80s, and that's in Los Angeles. Yeah, I was the manager of aircraft maintenance at the time, and we got all kinds of charts, and there's a radio there. You know, we can talk to the airplanes, talk to other people around TWA's operation.
And then we've got a shot of you and the other mechanics, and I'm assuming this is your mess hall, dining hall area.
That was in what was called the commissary at the time, and it's cafeteria. I'm sorry. Yeah, that would have been about 68 or 69, maybe something like that. We were sitting there by the window because it was convenient to watch all the flight attendants come and go, you know.
Right. And here's a picture. You said it was just more recently. This is a few years old of you and your wife and your daughter, Amy, as well as is it her husband and their child?
Yeah, that's on the left there. That's our grandson, Devin Miles, and then Amy is there, and then my wife Evelyn, then me, and our son-in-law Dan Miles, and that was in our house year before last.
So let's go back to you and your wife for a second. So you've worked in the airline industry for a long time, and I hope that you were able to utilize the discounts on the flights and being able to travel a little bit. Where's some of the places that you've been able to travel over the years with your wife?
Well, we traveled traveled to some interesting places. We were in London a couple of times, and we were in Amsterdam. We went to Spain 2 or 3 times. We spent along the Mediterranean coast there. We went with friends of ours. We took my parents over there one time, and they had a great time. Believe it or not, my dad, in the hotel, we first checked in the hotel there on the Mediterranean. My dad was looking around. He said, "I know that guy over there." I said, "Get out of here. There's no way." He walked over there. Sure enough, it was the guy that used to work for my dad. They came in on the same flight we did. Of course, it was a 747. You know, you can't see all the people, but so they ran around together. They rented a car. The other couple and my parents, they rented a car and drove all over southern Spain. Had a heck of a good time. And we went one other place. We went to Japan one time. It wasn't on TWA, but we used the TWA guest pass on Singapore Airlines, and we went to Tokyo and visited some exchange students that we used to have. We kept Japanese exchange students for 4 or 5 years, and we got to visit them and their parents and go all over that island in Japan, the main island.
That's great. So what did your wife do? She was just, did she have her own career? Or?
Well, when I met her, she was a telephone operator. And of course, when we moved to Kansas City, at that point, she wasn't working anymore, and we had our little girl, and so she was busy. And then she got another job there in Kansas City for about a year. Then she didn't work for a while. We moved to California, and she started working in the real estate business. So she sold real estate in California and Colorado and Missouri, Kansas. So she had quite a career in real estate.
That's great. And again, I commend you two for reaching my 60, coming up on 61. My parents at 54. And, you know, it does a lot to be able to stick with somebody for that long. And, you know, obviously you've got a lot of memories together. So what are some of the, I guess, favorite moments that you've just had over your career with TWA that, you know, were kind of pinnacle moments for yourself? I know we've got a picture here of when you were retired, and I believe this is probably in LA, or is this back in Kansas City?
That's in LA. That would have been December 30th of 1985.
Okay. And you said you went from TWA to the other airline. Was that this transition?
No, when I left TWA, I didn't go to another airline. I did something entirely different.
What did you do?
I started to work for the Federal Aviation Administration.
And explain that.
Well, when I left TWA, they gave me a bunch of money in those days to leave, so I was happy to do that. And I didn't have any other job in mind when I left. I did apply at some other carriers, and I got offered jobs, but they just didn't appeal to me that much at that time. So I applied to the Federal Aviation Administration, and I was an aviation safety inspector for the FAA for about 16 years, which meant I was a maintenance inspector for the FAA.
You got to fly around to different hubs and go in and make sure multiple types of multiple planes, multiple airlines, while you're in that hub, were running up to par.
That's what we did. Yes, sir.
Okay. And there were some major moments in TWA history, some good, some tragic. What would be some major moments you'd like to mention? And if you'd like to say anything about Flight 800?
Well, Flight 800 was a total disaster. I've read most of the stuff about what people think happened and all that, but it was the one thing that, I shouldn't say it was the one thing, but it was the one of the causes of TWA's demise. There were several other things that played into that, but that was an unbelievable occurrence. TWA, we'd worked our way through many things. We had an aircraft blowing up over the Mediterranean. We had aircraft hijacked. We had aircraft with bombs go off in them, and we survived all that stuff. But 800 was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. And the airline was not in the best of hands at that time. So they just couldn't survive that.
Well, obviously you've had a long career with TWA and also with the, FAA, making sure all the airlines are running correctly. What would you say would be kind of some of the major things that you learned and that you really got out of it? How did it, enrich your life, and what did you really enjoy about it?
Well, at TWA, I had a good time the entire time I worked there. Now, I was lucky. I had good supervisors, good managers. We had some that weren't so good, but I was lucky. I avoided all those people. I worked with lots and lots of good mechanics, good supervisors. Overall, we had a great time. It was a sad occurrence when TWA stopped operation. You could see it coming. I mentioned Mr. Cruz earlier. He forecasted what was going to happen, and he was accurate. His time frame was just off by a few years, but he was a very, very smart guy. He knew exactly what was going to happen, and it did. It would have happened even without 800. It would have happened. So it's just one of those business deals,
And who are some of the people that you still keep in contact today? They're some of your favorite employees or friends that you got to know over the years.
Well, I touch base with Tom Mealy once in a while, and Ron Ford, and there's a fella in LA there, Darwin Ufford. I talk to him every once in a while, and there's a lot of the folks I work with, unfortunately, are not here anymore. I try to I try to stay in touch with the ones that I can. I see Dave Renton in Kansas City once in a while. I worked with Dave in LA and in MCI. He worked in the coordinator's office also. He had a different shift than I did, but Dave and I worked together a lot of times, and he stayed with TWA and he did okay. So just there's so many people you just can't mention them all.
Right. So overall, if you were going to kind of sum up your time at TWA, what would you like to say to the other alumni, what you got out of it, and just kind of an overall, what you really enjoyed about it?
Well, I guess I enjoyed the people. I enjoyed working with the people. I mean, I worked with people in all different departments over my career. They were all great people. They worked, they pulled together. Basically we had a really good time, and I'll just say this: TWA taught me how a good airline operates. So when I went to the FAA, I understood why our manual said certain things and why certain things had to happen a specific way, because at TWA, right up until the end, we ran a very good operation, very good group of maintenance folks, and the whole airline was full of good people for that matter. But of course, my focus was primarily on maintenance people.
And then what would you like to say in closing to your wife, who's always been supportive, and your family and your grandson? What would you like to kind of pass on to them?
Well, of course, my wife, and she moved all over the country with me, and sometimes it wasn't convenient for things that she wanted, but she stayed with me, and yeah, we had good times everywhere we were. We met lots of people. In later years, Amy was with us when we bounced around at different places, and she had to, and this was after I left TWA, right after I left it, she had to move her high school from the little town where we lived in California to Denver, and that was a hard thing for her to do in her senior year at high school, but she stayed with us, and it's nice to have support like that.
That's right. Well, is there anything else you'd like to say in closing?
No, I think that's good, Sean. I appreciate everything you're doing here. I hope it adds to TWA's story there at the museum and on their website, and I've enjoyed doing it.
All right. Well, I'm going to close this out, but just stay on the line.
Okay.